שלום לכם, אני עקבו ביגמן וברוכים הבאים בפודקאסט אידיוטים שימושיים. יש לי הרבה מה לומר, אבל הפעם הפודקאסט מוקדש לראיון עם דיוויד וו, האנליסט הבכיר בוול סטריט לשעבר שמתגורר בישראל ממש מתחת לאף שלנו. דיוויד שמש בתפקידים בכירים בין היתר בבנק אוף אמריקה ובגופים פיננסיים אחרים. יש לו ראייה מאוד מעניינת של הזירה הגלובלית, של השחקנים השונים, של האינטרסים שלהם, של מה מניע אותם. דיוויד מתוקף תפקידו כאנליסט פיננסי עוקב באופן יומיומי אחרי פרטים רבים שמרכיבים את התמונה הכוללת במגוון מדינות, עורך סקרים יומיים, הוא עוקב אחרי החדשות, מתעניין כמעט בכל דבר קטן שיכול לעזור לו להרכיב את התמונה הגדולה, והוא משתף אותנו בתובנות שלו בשיחה הזאת. בשבילי זאת הייתה שיחה מאוד מעניינת שפתחה לי קצת את הראש לחשוב אחרת על הדברים שאנחנו רואים, ולא רק מתוך הפרספקטיבה המצומצמת שאנחנו הישראלים רגילים להתבונן בה. אז אני מקווה מאוד שגם אתם תהנו מהשיחה הזאת. השיחה מתקיימת בשפה האנגלית, זו השפה שדיוויד דובר. בערוץ היוטיוב שלי היא תופיע עם כתוביות בעברית, כך שמי שמתקשה להזין לאודיו בספוטיפיי ובפלטפורמות אחרות יכול לגשת ליוטיוב וליהנות מהכתוביות ומהתרגום לעברית. מומלץ מאוד לעשות את זה, השיחה הזאת מאוד מעניינת ומאוד חשובה. לדיוויד יש גם פודקאסט שהוא חלק מאתר מידע, הפודקאסט הזה נקרא לא גבולות, הוא מעלה אצלנו מדי שבוע פרק שבו הוא מנתח היבטים שונים של הכלכלה הגלובלית, מאוד מעניין, מאוד מומלץ, אפשר למצוא אותו ביוטיוב ובאתר מידע. אני ממליץ לכם לחפש אותו ולעקוב אחריו באופן קבוע, אתם לא תצטערו על כך. לפני שאנחנו מתחילים, אני רוצה להזכיר לכם שהפודקאסט הזה לא היה מתקיים בלי התמיכה של המנויים והשותפים שלנו, מנויי מידע שתומכים בי בפודקאסט שלי וגם באתר מידע בכללותו. בזכותכם אנחנו יכולים לעשות את התחקירים שאנחנו עושים, לבצע את הרעיונות האלו, להחזיק את הפודקאסט הזה וגם את האתר, אז אני מודה לכם על כך מאוד. מי שעדיין לא הצטרף לרשת המנויים שלנו, עדיין לא מאוחר, יש לנו קישור בתחתית הפרק הזה, תיכנסו, תקליקו, תצטרפו למנויים שלנו, תקבלו גם גישה לוובינרים המיוחדים שאנחנו עושים למנויים מדי שבוע, דברים מאוד מעניינים. השבוע היה שם יונתן דחוח הלוי שחשף בפנינו פרטים שלא ידענו על המחדל המודיעיני של מלחמת חרבות ברזל, וכל שבוע יש לנו משהו אחר מעניין לא פחות. אז כדאי לכם מאוד להצטרף, גם לתמוך בנו וגם לקבל גישה לכל התכנים האלה. החבילה הכי משתלמת בשוק. אנחנו מיד מתחילים. So David, thank you for coming to my podcast, Useful Idiots. I'm happy to see you here. And there's so much to talk about today, and specifically after the Trump-Zalensky exchange this week, which is amazing. But before we get into the issues, I'd like to get to know you a little bit better. So what can you tell us about yourself besides the titles? I mean, a world economist, you have a vast experience in like the big picture issues of the economy and Wall Street, obviously. But I'd like to know more about you. So
yeah. I mean, I was born in Pittsburgh, of all places. My parents were both born in Shanghai, in China, and my family were forced to run away just before the Communist Revolution. My grandparents were both very successful industrialists in Shanghai before the Communist Revolution. So my parents grew up in Taiwan, okay, and I was born in the U.S. because my father went to did his master's degree at Carnegie Mellon University, and after that he went back to Taiwan. So I grew up in Taiwan, and at the age of 15, my parents put me on a plane and sent me off to boarding school in America. So I spent, the next 15 years in the U.S. I did my, undergraduate studies in the U.S. I did my PhD at Columbia University in New York. And I started my first job, actually, out of my PhD program at the International Monetary Fund, which was in D.C. And I loved, working for the IMF. That was my first, sort of hand experience with international economics and international public policy. And that was pretty amazing. I was involved in the Asian crisis in 97, the Russia crisis in 98. So I was at the Lebanon crisis in 2000. So from that point of view, I had a lot of experience, an amazing experience. But then again, my wife was from Israel, who at the time had to, commute between Israel and D.C., found it was simply impossible because back in 2000, believe it or not, there were no direct flights from Israel to actually D.C. She had to go through New York. Right. So that whole trip was a bit of a nightmare. So she put her foot down and said, we got to basically move. So that's how I started exploring opportunities in the private sector, and then ended up going to London. which was sort of a halfway house. So that was my first, sort of experience foray into the private sector. My first job was running the emerging market local strategy for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I did that at Citibank for 4 years. And then I joined Barclays Capital, and where I spent 6 years as the head of global foreign exchange research. I took Barclays from number 12 to number 1. Okay, by the time I left. And then in 2010, Bank of America called me up, made me an amazing offer I couldn't turn down, which is to run all of global macro strategy out of New York. So I ended up basically for the following 10 years, I moved back to New York. I built a team of 50 analysts. We were the #1 ranked team. Actually, by 2020, which was my last year at the bank before I retired and moved to Israel permanently. And my team was basically, my team, every industry has got their own little Oscars. In Wall Street research, the Oscars call Institutional Investor Survey. In that survey, my team of 50 analysts got 24 #1 ranked position in 2020, which was more than all other banks, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs combined. So I said, well, at that point, I couldn't do better than that. And I said, I promised my wife, who had been following me around the world all these years, that I will move to Israel when I retire. So that's how it came about. I caught the last flight to Israel basically just before COVID took off. Oh. And thankfully, so now I live in Israel. I couldn't be any happier. I absolutely love it here. I've got 5 grandchildren here in Israel. And all I think about is, how to help them basically, how to help Israel become more successful so that my grandchildren can really look forward to an amazing life here. But I really love it here.
Why you love it so much? Because us Israelis are always thinking about, Israelis always want to move. Things are better, abroad. Germany is cheaper. America is cheaper. Everything's nicer. I mean, it's always like the orientation is the opposite. And this is surprising. Someone who has, you're not born here. I mean, so why do you like it so much? I mean, it's
I think this is listen, I have to say, I think I have pretty high standards. Right? So I don't say it lightly when I say I love Israel, because all my life, I lived in New York. I lived in London, I lived in Paris, I live in big cities, I traveled the world. I've been to the best places, the best everything, in life has to offer. And I come to Israel and I realize that it's just incredible how amazing so many things are here in Israel. By the way, it's not everything, okay? But there's something that are absolutely amazing. Okay, so for example, a lot of Israelis don't know. I mean, again, every country's got their, basically their plus and minuses. Right. I mean, I love, I'm not a big fan of Tel Aviv. I'm not a big fan of Jerusalem, but I happen to love where I live right now. I live in Karmei Yosef, in case people don't know Karmei Yosef. It's in the beginning of the foothills of Jerusalem, which is surrounded by basically some of the best vineyards in the country, right? So I look at,
It's like Israel's Italy, kind of.
Exactly. We call it the little Tuscany of Israel, right? I mean, literally, listen, just this weekend, we went for a little walk with our grandchildren to fields that are covered by red poppies. Listen, I mean, it's so green that we could be in Scotland. Literally, there are parts of, I don't understand Israelis, basically, they travel long distance, go to Greece, whatever, but, or anywhere else for that matter. There's some amazingly, breathtakingly beautiful places in Israel. For example, I'm very into gardening. I mean, one of the things I fell in love with when I came to Israel, because I mean, all my life I live in big cities. So once I moved to Karmei Yosef, by the way, I bought my house from Ida Nudo. I don't know if you know Ida Nudo, right? Ida Nudo was the the hearing of the hearing from the refusnik movement. So when Ida arrived in Israel in 1985, right? Arik Sharon, back then was the housing minister, took her to Karmei Yosef and said, Ida, just to show our great thanks, to the work that you've done for the Jewish people, you choose a plot and we're going to build you a house, that will be worthy of your sacrifice, And she chose this plot where I now live, And I bought the house from her in 2008, And what made me fall in love with the house, and, we've all tore it down and rebuild it, but the plot and what it's around is the fact that Ida had planted, this is a woman who spent 15 years in Siberia, in a concentration camp. She came to Israel and she became an avid gardener. She planted every single plant in the Bible in her backyard.
Oh.
When I saw that, it was inspiring because, for one thing, there are a lot of what a lot of Israelis don't realize, again, is the diversity of wildflowers in Israel. I mean, now I've gotten to know a little bit about basic gardening and so on and so forth. I just realized what a treasure. I mean, it's amazing. Again, we could sit here talking about wild tulips, wild cyclamens, wild narcissus, wild crocuses, and so on and so forth. But what I'm telling you, this gardening is a very good example. I'm giving you sort of one aspect of Israeli soul a lot of people don't realize. So, for example, we're talking about, I'm a perfectionist. I believe that any culture, any society, if it wants to achieve perfection, it wants to be successful, it has to be prepared to achieve perfection. But perfection requires attentiveness to details. I'm considered one of the most successful analysts on Wall Street in the last 20 years. And I think my success has a lot to do with the fact that I'm a perfectionist. And, perfectionism requires attentiveness to details. I'm obsessed about details. Now, we know the Israelis details is not their strength. Okay.
Yeah, this is like anti-Israeli, what you just said.
And yet, amazingly, I've met some people in Israel that are just perfectionists. And I'll give you some examples, right? I mean, just in the realm of gardening, if nothing else. Like, I bought, I wanted to plant an Israeli oak tree alone in my backyard. I wanted to buy an old one because, alone, by the way, is the tree that populated all of Israel, right. Basically time of King David. Okay, that was the tree. But the people who settled in Israel, at the end of the 19th century, they didn't bother to plant alone because it takes too long. So I was in search to basically buy an old alone to plant it in my backyard. And guess what? I searched and I found an Israeli guy. This guy, believe it or not, he has collected 500 different types, varieties of alon in his backyard in memory of his son. Okay, I love camellia. Okay, and people thought, well, you were crazy to basically grow camellia in Israel because who grows camellia in Israel? Guess what? I then found, search. I found an 80-year-old guy who has been growing camellias in Israel for 50 years, who grows 50 different kinds of camellias. Okay, I just now discovered last week a place that that's in the conversation business. They actually have managed to conserve Israeli tulips, wild tulips. You know what people don't realize is to tulips, to go from seeds to bulb, it takes 7 years. But guess what? They did it. And thank God they were willing to sell me a few. I can tell you, like, for example, in the region, talking about perfectionism, I can tell you, I've tasted some of the best, mozzarella cheese anywhere in the world in Israel, by the way. Not buffalo mozzarella because the buffalo is no good here in Israel. But mozzarella, they're being baked by Iraqi Jews that really got it, okay? With the best, basically, baguette. I mean, near me, Ishlechan, if you haven't been there, I mean, they really make the best baguette, in my humble opinion, all of Israel. And it's probably better than 90% of baguette you're going to get in Paris these days. Because today in Paris, they don't even handmade the baguette anymore. It comes right out of the factory, delivers to the bakery. What I'm saying is that in Israel, there's some very crazy perfectionists. And that's a part of Israel I love. Because, these people don't live in Tel Aviv. They don't work in high tech, whatever it is. But there are people in Israel who really go to basically the very deep end when it comes to life. And that, to me, is what I love about Israel especially.
Okay, that was interesting. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. So actually what I like about your analysis when I listen to your podcast on Mida is you kind of take us out of our local position, and we get this broader idea of what's going on in the big world. Usually Israelis, we're typical of Israelis is to view world events as if they're Israeli politics. It's good for Bibi or bad for Bibi, good for Hitnachliot or bad for Hitnachliot, whatever is on the discussion at the same time. And you kind of, when we had a discussion on this webinar also, we kind of open up the horizon to understand the bigger picture, which I really appreciate. So I would like to go through some of these issues. And obviously we cannot begin with the Trump-Zalensky exchange this week, which as most people, I saw the first 2 minutes and I was like, oh no, this is a catastrophe. What has Trump done, right? and then you listen to the whole thing, you get like a different picture. But besides the specifics about the dynamics between the people, I would like to maybe understand your view of the whole issue of the Ukraine war. Where's the Trump administration going with this? What's their goal?
I think, it's actually very interesting because, the main, the reaction from the mainstream media, whether it's in the U.S., especially in Europe, and not to mention, elsewhere, is that, Trump is selling Ukraine down the river. Right. That Trump actually is caving to, Trump is selling out to Russia. That Trump doesn't even know how to negotiate because he's already given away, his grandmother's, whatever for porcelain even before he even sat down with basically Putin. So that's the sort of the standard, interpretation of what's been going on. And I think that is basically misreading the entire situation. I think what we need to realize, and I think it's very important for Israelis to realize, is that, in my view, to understand what exactly happened between Trump and Zalensky last week, we have to understand that Trump views Iran as a lower lying fruit than Ukraine. And what do I mean by that? And how are these two things connected? And this is where Israel comes in, this is where Bibi comes in, and so on and so forth. Okay. Let me tell you this. Trump thinks, I think, listen, I don't know Trump personally, but I know enough people. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. I have this reputation as being Trump's whisperer on Wall Street. For what it was worth, this is something that I have a reputation for. In fact, I'm making a living from it, if you like, because these days I'm in a consulting business for some of the biggest, investors in the world. And the way I see this is very simple. Trump views, Iran as being a lot more important to the U.S. than Ukraine. Just think about this, right? The Middle East, this is the lifeline of the global economy is oil, right? There's no doubt that the Middle East is far more important to the U.S. strategically speaking than Ukraine. Even though Obama already pronounced, whatever, now 12 years ago, that Ukraine basically was not important for U.S. strategically. Mm-hmm. Okay. In my humble opinion, Trump wants a deal with Russia, and he's willing to cut Russia some slack on Ukraine in exchange for Russia making big concessions over Iran. Just imagine if Trump has decided that he's going to give Israel the go-ahead to bomb Iran's nuclear program. He has to make sure that Russia will at least turn a blind eye to whatever Israel is going to do. Because Russia and Iran, most Israelis don't even realize, they just signed a security agreement less than 2 months ago. Okay? So, if Trump is going to tell Bibi go ahead and make their days in Tehran, he has to be sure that, Putin doesn't go bananas and then start basically attack Israel, whatever. And, I doubt they will, but nevertheless, Trump wants to be sure that this is not going to trigger World War III, right? At the same time, just think about this, right? Trump understands very well the day that Israel attacks Iran's nuclear program, if oil's been equal, oil price is going to go to $100, $200, and whatever. Yeah. So Trump is going to basically want to make sure that doesn't happen, because the last thing he wants to do is to give Bibi the go-ahead to hit Iran, and then the U.S. economy suffers and go into recession as a result. So what does Trump want to do? When any smart person want to do? He'll want to convince the Saudis to up production as soon as Israel hits Iran. To be able to offset the 1.8 million barrels per day of oil export that Iran, basically did in January alone. We now know. Actually, the latest number shows very clearly the Iranian oil exports, essentially jumped 30% in January. It went to 1.8 million barrels per day. Okay. So
what about the sanctions, though?
Well, the sanctions are not working because, the sanctions are a joke. And not that, listen, the reason, I want to say they're a total joke, but Iran has figured out how to circumvent the sanctions. And it's not even a question of Iran. The fact is that 90% of the ships, the tankers carrying Iranian oil to China, because China is buying 99% of it, are either Chinese ships or ships that are owned by Chinese subsidiaries in Venezuela and Cuba, wherever they may be. Okay, so the point here is unless Trump is willing to board these ships by force, or to bomb these Chinese ships, like there's not much the U.S. can do about it. Okay, and this is the reason why. This is the reason why, and we'll come back to the China bit a little bit later, but this is the reason why, of all places, okay, the Americans and the Russians in their first sit down was in Saudi Arabia. Because Trump absolutely needs Mohammed bin Salman to be on board, to be able to basically, neutralize any damage to the global economy as a result of taking action against Iran.
We need to get Russia off board of Iran and get Saudi Arabia on board with Trump.
Exactly. At
this is the combination.
Exactly. And then not to mention the fact that Saudi Arabia is not the most important, it's one of two most important countries within OPEC Plus. The other one, of course, is Russia. And Mohammed bin Salman and Putin are blood brothers, let me tell you that. So there is no way Mohammed bin Salman would agree to increasing production without getting at least the sort of implicit okay from Putin, maybe the Russians will even do this and so on and so forth. So what I'm telling you is this. For people say, oh, Bibi, what has he been doing? Whatever. The guy is basically is he lazy or whatever? But people don't realize that there's a timing for everything. Bibi knows. Everything I'm telling you, I'm assuming he knows. And that what he knows is that, it's easy to say, well, I'm going to go hit Iran. But Trump, from the U.S. standpoint, they want to make sure everything goes off smoothly. They don't want this to basically trigger World War III. They don't want this to trigger a global recession. But there is no doubt to me that Trump views Ukraine. Let's put it this way. Trump sees Iran as being much easier to deal with than Ukraine. Iran, you can deal with it just by basically attacking and destroying its nuclear, program. Ukraine is a far more difficult thing. And this is why Trump decided to go for this. In fact, I actually think what's really going on, and again, I can't prove this, but I strongly suspect, this is what's going on. Because we all know that for years, Bibi has been ahead of everybody in terms of identifying Iran as being a threat to the world, actually not just to Israel. Right? And this is the reason why Bibi until now has been saying, listen, Iran's not just Israel's problem. Right. The U.S. should be involved. Why should we be the ones who take care of Iran for the whole world, right? This is why Bibi never really wanted to basically hit Iran unilaterally without, basically the rest of the world being part of it. I think what's going on is that Trump has decided, Trump has, basically persuaded Bibi, you're going to have to do this. Because there's no way Trump is going to order an attack by the U.S. on Iran. And the reason is very simple, by the way, because in the U.S., foreign policy is known. If you break it, you have to fix it. In other words, if U.S. were to attack Iran and something happens the next day, like the regime falls and so on and so forth, whatever, where Iran falls into total anarchy, chaos, then it becomes a U.S. responsibility. Yeah. This is why Trump will never want to get involved directly from the point of view U.S. And Israel hitting Iran, that's a different story. Israel, whatever happens to Iran the day after, Israel, will not necessarily use that as a problem. But my point here is, I think Trump has told Bibi, you know what? You're going to take care of Iran for me and for the world, for the U.S., and then we're going to give you Gaza. Afterwards, I'm going to basically make sure the Egyptians, the Jordanians, taking all the Gazans. I actually think that's what this is going on.
So let's take this one stage forward. So also the Gaza ceasefire, which Israelis really don't like, is also part of this because Trump wanted to cool down things so we can focus on other issues. And you think the munitions sales to Israel, big batch came to Israel of munitions just a few weeks ago. You think this is related to Iran and not renewing the war in Gaza? Because Israelis think, okay, we're going to go ahead and kick off Gaza, but maybe this is meant for something else.
Listen, I don't know. We know there were some bunker buster bombs that were delivered to Israel, but again, there are bunker buster bombs and there are bunker buster bombs. So obviously Dave Ignacio in the Washington Post had mentioned one of his articles that, according to his U.S. sources, the bunker buster bombs have been delivered to Israel. But again, these bunker buster bombs could be,
they've been used in Gaza and in Lebanon too.
Exactly.
That's it.
For the tunnels and so on.
Yeah.
Right?
We've been using them.
So these may not be the ultimate bunker buster. So I don't know. I cannot tell you. I wish I did, but I'm speculating. But in any event, whether the delivery has been made or not, believe me, you and I won't know about it because it won't be in the newspapers. Okay, it will be some kind of special delivery, happens in the middle of the night. It will be top secret. So from that point of view, like, I think, let's just assume, because this is why I'd rather analyze from the point of view of the reaction function, right? I do think that the Gaza thing was very simple, right? For Trump to pull this thing off, he needs the Saudis, okay, to be able to, basically be in the same room with Israelis without looking really bad. This is why the phase one agreement, okay, to the extent it got implemented, basically allows the Saudis, the ability to at least get on the phone with Israelis, okay? And I think from that point of view, I think that's very important because, the Saudis don't like the Hamas. We know that. But publicly, they will never be, literally like embrace Israel while, So this is also the reason why I think that we're getting very close, like to Israel possibly taking action against Iran. Because like in a way that you don't want to do that once fighting has resumed in Gaza. Right? Because once fighting has resumed in Gaza, then, everybody is going to sort of be focusing on, oh, wow, how many Palestinians are dying in Gaza and so on and so forth, instead of the situation. And this is why I kind of feel like, I think that's probably Witkoff's, mission right now is trying to keep the negotiation going until all the other pieces fall in place so that Israel can go and hit Iran. I mean, I think the way it's going to work is that it's going to happen on a Friday. Like after basically, after the market is closed, Israel essentially planes take off, hit Iran, early morning of Saturday. And what they're hoping is that, by Saturday afternoon, it's going to be all over. And then Saudi Arabia is going to issue a statement saying that they're going to be increasing production, as of, basically immediate to an immediate effect to offset any problem. And I suspect, meanwhile, in order to basically ensure that Iran does not retaliate, okay, against Israeli attack by, firing on the Saudi oil fields and whatever for the rest of it in the Gulf, I suspect that you probably, as we speak right now, you're seeing deployment of air missile defense systems, okay, in the Gulf to be able to make sure that they can neutralize this. So I think, and then, Lavrov, by the way, was in Tehran for 24 hours last week, because on Wednesday. I thought that was that might be the sort of a last-ditch attempt on the part of Russia to stop, essentially an Israeli attack on Iran. But what was interesting, of course, that meeting ended with a joint press conference between Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and the Iranian foreign minister. And the Iranian foreign minister said that, Iran is not willing to negotiate under essentially pressure and sanctions. And this is very, very important because in my view, Iran at that moment has closed the window for negotiating with Trump. And this is very important.
Oh, so you think the Russians were mediating on behalf of Trump? And
they were trying to. They were trying to, but they were basically told no. And because what Trump wants, and it's right, because the Iranians have been playing for time in the last 20 years. Right? I mean, ever since we've been talking about the Iranians are very smart politically.
Right.
I mean, the only person who's as smart was smarter than the Iranians in all of Israel. I'm talking about politically is Bibi, because Israeli politicians on average are dumb, right? And people like Bennett, Lapid, all these people, Gallant, Gantz, they're all basically, in my view, political idiots. I mean, they should be on your show. They're useless idiots, actually, not just useful idiots, useless idiots. But the point here, the Iranians are smart. They've been playing for time. Now, Trump knows that. Trump is not going to allow them to play for time. That's why Trump is telling them, you know what? If you, I want to negotiate with you, but to even begin negotiation, you have to declare, okay, your readiness to give up your nuclear weapons right now, before we even sit down and have a negotiation. Right. The Iranians said basically, forget it, whatever. This is why, Khamenei's been talking about superpower. He's talking about God these days anymore. He's saying, well, the Iranian people actually, we have the magical stick of Moses. We can defeat the Americans. But what I'm saying to you, this is what this is about. And then from a Russian standpoint, in my humble opinion, I think I don't want to say Putin is prepared to sell Iran down the river, but clearly from Putin's standpoint, there's no love with Islam, no doubt about that, okay? But more importantly, for Russia, Iran was always just a chess piece on the board, okay? To make America's life miserable, to make Israel's life miserable. So it was a projection of Russian power. But guess what? So much for this power, Hezbollah is pretty much over, Hamas is over, and then, Iranian air defense system has been more or less neutralized. So I have to believe at this point, for Russia, okay, if they can, by giving, if the exchange is giving, essentially, I'm not saying flushing Iran completely down the toilet, but let's just say turning a blind eye to what happens to Iran in exchange for major concessions on the part of the U.S. over Ukraine. To me, that is like a bargain of a century. I mean, if you're Putin, you're going to take that without even thinking very hard about this. Okay, and this is why this is why I think it's very important that it's not like Trump doesn't know what he's doing, like he's just basically selling out to the Russians. There is a bargaining in the process. In my humble opinion, when the Americans met the Russians in Saudi Arabia, I guarantee you they spent as much time talking about Iran as they did about Ukraine.
About Ukraine. So basically, if we take this axis of China, Russia, Iran, so the Trump strategy will be to pull out Russia from this trio, and then maybe, as you say, maybe attack Iran using Israel, and this way this whole axis kind of dissolves, and then we have only China to deal with, which is easier. It's one front, it's one area, but it's still a very big challenge. So let's talk a little bit about China. Where Trump is heading on that?
I think listen, I mean, I think for me, we have to realize something, which is that Trump is very different than Biden. It could not be. And I'm not talking,
I noticed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're not talking about he likes Israel, doesn't like Israel. It has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the fundamental worldview. So what is the fundamental difference in terms of the worldview of Trump versus, Right. I'll tell you, I think by now everybody has read, at least, if not watched, J.D. Vance's speech in Munich, right? I mean, if you think about what that speech was all about, if we have to put it into 5 sentences, what J.D. Vance went to tell the Europeans in Munich, and by the way, that was not some off-the-cuff, spontaneous speech that some vice president of the United States goes to Europe to basically vent his frustration. I mean, this was a very well-thought-out speech, and I have no doubt it has the sort of buy-in of the rest of the administration. So this was not, it was not an accident, okay? And it's completely consistent with what the administration stands for. So the message to Europeans was very simple. J.D. Vance basically saying, we Americans, we're not sure. We still have shared values with the Europeans because you guys have been cracking down on free speech. You've been suppressing democracy, okay? Therefore, we don't have that much in common to the extent that you're becoming more totalitarian like Russia and China. And frankly speaking, sometimes we wonder if there's any difference between Europe and China and Russia right now. And then the punchline is, given we no longer have shared values, we don't want to defend your security anymore. That's it. That is the basic message from J.D. Vance to Europe. By the way, if Lapid or Gantz, these basically idiots are running Israel, that will be the same message, basically from the Americans, by the way, too, and rightly so. But the point here is this. The point here, what we need to realize is that, what the under Biden, okay, the Americans saw the world in black and white terms. Okay, under Biden and the neocons around him, and most of them were Jewish, of course, they saw the world as divided between democracies versus authoritarian regimes, okay? And therefore, with that worldview, every country is either an ally or an adversary, okay? There was a very clear demarcation line. And from that point of view, the U.S. foreign policy was about, essentially rallying the allies okay, behind the U.S. policy, and then single out China and hit China hard. And Russia, of course, too. Okay, that's what it was. Okay. I mean, even to hit China and Russia hard, they were even willing to cut some slack to Iran, to Venezuela, and so on and so forth. I mean, that was nothing. Okay, but that's how they saw the world.
Even though they were mocking Trump when he said China was America's adversary in 2016. I mean,
so. There's a reason for that. We'll come back to the second.
Okay.
For Trump, if you think about the J.D. Vance speech, the U.S. no longer sees the world as in such black and white terms. It's not like authoritarian regime versus democracy, because the U.S. basically saying Europe is becoming authoritarian. So from that point of view, the U.S., in fact, at this point, the U.S. sees the world only in terms of us versus them. Them is everybody, whether you're democracy, semi-democracy, or authoritarianism. Okay. So from that point of view, for the U.S., they're no longer treating allies differently than they're treating, so-called adversaries. If you look at, for example, the tariffs that Trump announced over the last few weeks, it's going to hit Germany harder than everybody else. Okay, so that is the reality. It's going to hit Germany like literally 3 times harder than it's going to hit China, by the way. Wow. And it's going to hit Japan. It's going to hit Korea. He just basically hit Canada. So what I'm saying to you is that's how the world is evolving from the U.S. standpoint, which is the U.S. no longer looks at the world through the lens of allies versus adversaries. It's all about who can I do business with? That's it. Because at the end of the day, Trump is right. Because all this, what Biden did, dividing the world between democracy versus authoritarian, all it did is basically push the world closer to World War III. I mean, all it did was to push more money into the pockets of defense contractors, because we're spending more and more money on defense, on war making, and so on and so forth. I mean, how is the little guy in America benefit from that? What people don't realize about Trump's Make America Great Again, essentially philosophy, he's not interested for America to be great on the world stage. He wants to make the little Americans great again. That's his whole entire thing, is about which Americans. And Trump cares about the Americans that have been forgotten for most of the last 30 years. So that's what this is about. So from that point of view, doing a deal with Russia, over Ukraine, which poses very little strategic interest for the U.S. to win a major thing over Iran, that would literally essentially bring the Middle East back into America's fold. I mean, that would be, that is really the strategic thinking here. That's why this administration is very smart. And they're almost as smart as Bibi.
That's a headline. Talking about Europe, what do you think was Zalensky's goal when he walked into the White House last week? I mean, sure. Obviously, it seemed like it wasn't an ambush by the Trump administration. It was something he actually planned. He was provoking them throughout this whole 50 minutes conversation. He kind of wanted this. And then he goes to Europe and gets applauded by them. So is he thinking of a different alliance?
Let me say this. Zelensky is also very smart, but he's more of a tactician than he's a strategist. I can tell you, I'm conducting daily surveys in Ukraine, among other places. I'm conducting daily surveys in something like 20 countries. In fact, I'm conducting daily surveys in Iran. I can tell you any given day what percentage of Iranians are in favor of building a bomb.
Oh, yeah.
I can tell you, that in the last 3 days, ever since Zelensky returned to Ukraine from his U.S. trip, his approval rating in Ukraine has shot through the roof.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the reason this is very important, because you have to understand, only a week ago, not only the Americans, but the Europeans were calling for new elections in Ukraine. That many of them, the Americans certainly, but even the Europeans were willing to concede that Zelensky might have become a liability. And Zelensky's approval rating was collapsing in Ukraine. And just after this thing, wow, the Ukrainian people think, oh, wow, our little guy had just basically taken on the most powerful man in the world and basically stick it to his face. Now, so this is one part of it. This is very, very important, because at the end of the day, clearly Russia is moving at the speed of light, across the eastern Ukraine, and the Ukrainian troops are demoralized, the population demoralized. This was basically a major. The second thing, what people don't realize, is that how Zelensky behaved inside the White House had everything to do with the outcome of the German election 5 days earlier. What a lot of people don't realize this, I mean, forget about in Israel, anywhere, is that people don't realize that what is the real meaning of the outcome of this election in Germany, which I thought was the most important event of 2025. This is going to be a defining event. Now, as we know, in the last 3 years, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz ran, a coalition government. He ran it to the ground, by the way. But at least Scholz was a reasonable guy. He's from Hamburg. He's a pragmatist. And Scholz, he was a very reluctant participant in the war against Russia in Ukraine. And guess what? Scholz and Macron have barely been on speaking terms over the past year because Macron has been promoting this idea of an independent European security architecture. Macron wanted Germany to send the Taurus missile, which are probably the most effective and powerful NATO long-range missiles to Ukraine, and the Germans refused because Scholz said, over my dead body. Scholz was a pragmatist, of the best kind, in my view, in German politics. He's from Hamburg. He has a global mindset. Believe it or not, even with the pressure from the US, Germany's direct investment into China the last 2 years hit records. So from that point of view, Scholz was a clever guy. I mean, his tragedy was the fact that the Green Party, won 16% of the votes in the last election, and he could not bring on the Greens without giving them a lot of power, none of which is good. By the way, very, very bad for Germany. But it doesn't really matter. But now, Scholz is going to be replaced by Friedrich Merz. Merz is the head of the Christian Democrats. He's going to be the next chancellor of Germany. And this guy is very naive. He's of the worst kind, in my humble opinion. Very naive. His whole agenda is he's a Russia hawk. He is of the same mindset as many Europeans right now that, if once Russia's done with Ukraine, Europe is going to be next, And he's talking about, ever since, he won the election, even though it's very, very small victory, by the way, he's talking about, NATO maybe soon dead, that we need to become independent of the US, and all that kind of stuff. And then they're now trying to push to basically kill this debt break, which is inside the German constitution, so that they can start spending more money on defense. What I'm telling you is that, guess what? All of a sudden, Macron, who for the last 2 years literally has nobody to talk to about this independent security architecture, now he's got his best friend.
Right.
And you think, Zalensky doesn't know that? All of a sudden, and in the UK, of course, Starmer wants to play this. I mean, the biggest military contractor in all of Europe is BAE System, the British company. If Europe is going to up its spending on defense, the biggest winner is going to be the UK. There's no question about that. What I'm telling you is that...
So Europe is rearming and Zelensky is going to gain from that?
And Zelensky understands that. He understands that, with, the victory of Merz in Germany, he knows that, that Europe now has his back to the extent that he's less worried about the US withholding support. Because, in fact, you could even make the case that once he saw what was going on in Europe in terms of the rising antagonism of the Europeans towards the US, that they were not invited to the talks with the Russians and so on and so forth, that Europe was very upset. He had to show the Europeans that he was on their side.
Right.
In fact, I would say that the way he behaved towards Trump made him also a hero in Europe.
Oh, sure, yeah, sure, they loved him, yeah.
Right, exactly. So from that point of view, I think this is why Zelensky is smart in that sense. He understands who's buttering his bread, And this is the way things are going. So I think, so from that point of view, this is very important. Now, I do think, we can sit here and talk about whether Europe is going to be able to deliver the goods, right? I mean, to the extent that, with what money are they going to be able to replace the US aid and so on and so forth? And I do think down the road, I don't know if it's going to be 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, maybe even a month down the road if the stock market keeps falling, that they're going to try to figure out, how to basically go forward between the US and Europe. But at this particular moment, at this particular moment in time, I would argue for the world economy, for the world stock market, it's very bad. Because right now it's like, well, Zalensky just insulted Trump, okay? So Trump is not going to hold back in terms of his terror threats against Europe. Europe now thinks that the US has gone off to the deep end. They're not prepared to cut Trump a deal, okay, on the terror.
So the dynamics is of escalation.
Exactly, it's going to be an escalation. And the escalation is going to take its toll when it comes, first of all, when it comes to the global economy and the global stock market. Because what this basically, even though I can tell you, until 3 weeks ago, I was still thinking, well, the Europeans, I was hearing from my contacts in Brussels that the Europeans were still then deliberating to essentially surrender to Trump's, trade war threat, and they were going to cut, the average tariff on imported passenger cars from the U.S. from 10% to 2.5%. To actually, appease Trump. Because back then, 3 weeks ago, the Europeans were willing to do just about anything to keep Trump engaged on Ukraine. But now that Trump has literally washed his hand over Ukraine, the Europeans are going to literally stick in his face. So they're going to retaliate, and then they're going to say, well, let's all go down. So we're right now in this very emotional phase right now in cross-Atlantic relations. And I think from that point of view, this is going to, the next 4 to 6 weeks, I think things are going to feel very bad. Now, of course, things get very bad and then they get better because politicians at the end of the day, they don't like to be associated with bad outcomes. I mean, if Trump's approval rating right now is pretty high, right? But if his approval rating starts to go down, the stock market down at 20%, he's going to have to basically, think again. But for the time being, at least, I think, this tension is going to be increasing. And then Zalensky is going to be playing this tension for its every penny's worth. Okay.
So you think at the end, Zalensky will come and sign this agreement with the United States?
I think he has no choice.
This will happen, but the dynamic has to first escalate and then they diffuse.
Exactly. The question is when and how in exchange for what. And this is why the next 4 weeks are so important also. Because, guess what? We're now, in the beginning of March. Another 3 more weeks, the snow in eastern Ukraine will begin to melt, okay? And then if we learn anything at all, especially if the Russians learn anything at all in the last 3 years of this war, is that it's impossible to launch an effective offensive in April until the first week of May. Because your tanks are going to be stuck in mud, okay? Your personal, base carrier is going to be stuck in mud, right? I mean, as it is, this is why, what Zelensky's trying to do is to buy himself 4 more weeks. If he can somehow, stop the Russians or basically make it difficult, because the Russians right now are moving very quickly towards, the 4 strategic towns along, eastern Ukraine, which is Kupiansk, Liman, Seversk, and Pokrovsk, right? I mean, Putin is not going to sit down and negotiate until he's got these 4 towns under his control, because these are 4 very strategic towns that will basically guarantee Russia's defense against potentially hostile NATO down the road. This is why he'll want. But the question is, can Putin conquer, and basically, occupy these 4 places in the next 4 weeks?
4 weeks.
If Putin cannot do it, then you're talking about then you're talking about May and maybe even June. That's all Ukraine needs right now. That's why what we need to understand is that Zelensky's fighting, he's just basically fighting for more time. And there's something also very, very important. Which
what is expecting to happen in this time, though?
What is expecting to happen?
What will happen in June?
Okay. So I'll tell you, this is the most important thing. And I think, in some sense, Israel was lucky because, again, if it hadn't been for Bibi given, the green light to use the attack of the, what's it called? Not the cell phones, what is it?
The beepers.
The beepers. I mean, Israel will be facing a much bigger threat. And I was predicting this because everything is to do with drones. The most important development, concerning the world, from the Russia-Ukraine war, has been the major role played by the drones. Okay, let me just give you an example. when Russia these days go on the offensive, they don't go in with like 1,000 tanks, you know, like with 10,000 people and that kind of thing. They offensive usually consists of 10 soldiers, okay? Maybe 15 soldiers, that's it, on foot for the most part. They're dropped off by the person carrier and then they basically walk by foot, okay? And the reason is because these first-person view drones have become so powerful, okay? They have a short range, 10, 15 kilometers, so on and so forth. When they see a massing of troops or tanks, you know, they're just gonna come and basically blow you up.
Right.
Okay. Which makes it very difficult for anybody to go on the offensive. This is why Russia suffered very heavy casualties in their attempts trying to circle Pokrovsk over just the last couple of months. I mean, the casualties probably, obviously when you're already on the offensive, you're going to be sacrificing more people. But I hear that it's like a 3-to-1 in terms of Russia versus basically Ukrainian, basically casualty ratios. But the important thing is this. Ukraine has now perfected, Ukraine is now like up there and maybe even ahead of the Russians in the production of these drones. And let me tell you this, and then people don't realize this in Israel, but this year, in 2025, the Ukrainian army right now is intending to produce between 2 to 3 million drones.
Wow.
Now, imagine if they did have 2 or 3 million. I mean, Russians also basically plan to basically build 3 million drones. Now imagine if you have 3 million drones. Every time, I mean, just basically...
So they need this time actually for build-up, for forced build-up.
Exactly. The reason why I say Israel was lucky, and again, it was baby who saved Israel, is that Iran, obviously, it's very, you know, basically, they're advanced in drones, okay? And then Hezbollah had basically, Bibi not destroyed the Hezbollah leadership through the Beeper attack. Hezbollah could very soon be in that position to attack Israel with swarm drones, and Israel will be completely defenseless against it. And this is why I don't know if Bibi had that in mind when he gave the go-ahead to attack basically the Beepers, but that would have been the consequence if he did not. But my point to you is that Ukraine thinks, and then, you know, I think Zalensky's thinking, if I can hold out for another 6 more months, I'm going to have enough drones to basically inflict even bigger casualties on the Russians. I might be able to hold my lines. Meanwhile, the Russian economy is struggling. I mean, inflation is now over 25%, whatever, so on and so forth. There's some real serious. I mean, the Russian economy was able to withstand the war for 3 years, but now it's clearly struggling. So they're thinking, so the Europeans and Ukraine, their calculation is that if somehow they can drag this thing out for another 6 months, 12 months, that they're going to be able to get much better terms in terms of any peace deal with Russia. And so that's the game that the Europeans are trying to basically play, okay? So, and then Zelensky understands that. And then for Zelensky's also, it's you know, the guy is, you know, it's his war, because if Trump's terms, if the war ends on Trump's terms, which Putin's term, my prediction, and I will still stand by my prediction, you know, at the end of this thing, Zelensky is either going to be hung by his own people from the tallest tree in Kiev, or that he's going to go into exile in the U.S. to live in his $30 million house in Miami.
Right, that makes sense, right? Because he's signed on this war for the victory, right? So let's go back to China. What's Trump's strategy for China?
I think, you know, Trump's strategy in China. I think, you know, Trump in general. As I said before, like, you know, I think Trump sees everybody as the same.
Right.
Okay. If you're not America, then you're whatever. Okay.
Right.
You know, so I think one fundamental difference between there are several fundamental differences between the Biden versus Trump in terms of the way they look at China. Okay. Biden saw the world as one big zero-sum game. Okay. You know, it was actually very interesting because more or less around the same time that Biden became president, you know, Harvard University's Belfer Center, released a report, you know, which took them 3 years to compile, whatever it was, and it was paid for and sponsored by the former CEO of Google. And in this report, they tried to, you know, essentially come up with a ranking in terms of technology leadership across the most important technology in the world. This report came out, let's say, around 2020 or 21, whatever it is. And then guess what? The report's conclusion is that U.S. and China were tied in either first or second place in practically every single major technologies in the world. Okay? So at that point, I can tell you, that report was probably like the most well-read report in Washington of any whatever for the last 10 years. Everybody basically saw it, read it, or whatever. And then in that report, rightly or wrongly, basically said that, you know, unless we do something about this, China is going to eat our breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So therefore, the Biden administration saw this, you know, competition with China as one big zero-sum game. To the extent, if China wins, then we're going to lose. Which means that we have to win, which means China has to lose.
Right.
And this is why the whole policy towards China under Biden was one of total containment. Through sanctions, technology, you know, basically sanctions, and just basically, literally, like, you know, trying to strangle China. Economically, technologically, everything else. Now, then Trump comes along. It's very interesting because Trump is very, very secure in America's ability to compete. Okay, so the Democrats, they were worried. I mean, I'm not talking only Democrats. Obviously, many Republicans were also very anti-China, so on and so forth. So the main difference is that the last 4 years under basically Biden, America felt very insecure vis-a-vis China. America had lost its confidence in its ability to compete with China. So while America was investing in DEI and all that stuff, they wanted to basically stop China from progressing. Trump, on the other hand, he believes America, he strongly believes that the United States can compete with China, in fact, can beat China if America is free from the shackles of bureaucracy, politics, and everything that's holding the US back. You think Elon Musk is afraid of competing with the Chinese for 1 minute? Elon Musk has a lot of respect for the Chinese. That he's building his biggest car factory in the world is in China. He's now building his biggest battery factory in China. But let me tell you this, he's not afraid of anybody. Okay, so from that point of view, it's two very different approaches. This administration is much more confident, but this is also the reason why they see America's real enemy as being within, as opposed to external. They see America's enemy as the DEI, the whatever, the incompetency that has developed in American bureaucracy and American companies as a result of this kind of woke culture, right? So this is why, that's what this is about. And so from that point of view with China, now, of course, it gets, you know, I think, you know, Trump, he's a natural negotiator, which means that Trump thinks a deal is always better than no deal. And then he also knows to make a deal, there has to be enough basically for everybody around the table. So from that point of view, in my view, Trump is going to be looking for win-win outcome with China. I mean, you know, I'm not saying, listen, I mean, US and China are going to remain strategic rivals, the two most important, powerful countries in the world, and this is not going to change anything. But Trump is good, but there are so many things around the table where is a win-win right now. That's what they're going to go for. The only thing that worries me, and I think this is very important to say, you know, this is what it is that obviously, like, Trump is not a dictator. Trump also, we have to remember, Trump, like, you know, he has, you know, there are a lot of people even close to him who have different ideas about different things. For example, not everybody, you know, in the Republican Party is pro-Israel. Right. Okay? I mean, in fact, there are some people within the Republican Party who are very viciously anti-Israel, who are anti-Semites. That Trump has to basically put them in their place. I mean, this is, you know, we can talk about this story. But the same thing. There are a lot of Republicans who are massively anti-China, who still see China as being the biggest threat and so on and so forth. And I think what's been going on lately, over the last month, is that this voice, this anti-China voice, has gotten a little bit louder, okay? And I think, you know, this is the reason why I'll tell you, like, if you think about what just happened over the last 6 weeks, right? On the day of the inauguration, okay, Trump announced a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, but he didn't mention China. That evening, he did a press conference. And when he was asked, oh, well, so why not China? You promised you're going to hit China, you know, 60% tariff. He said, oh, well, we already hit China very hard in my first term. We're going to give them a pass this time. But the next day, okay, as we woke up, Trump announced a 10% tariff on China. And then 2 weeks later, he gave an exemption to Canada and Mexico. He suspended the tariff by 30 days, but China was hit 10% tariff. There was no suspension for China. And then 2 weeks later, we hear that basically that he now wants to double the tariff on China from 10% to 20%. And then 2 days later, which was last Friday, he said that one of the conditions he's demanding from Mexico and Canada is that they should also adopt the 20% tariff on Chinese imports. And then obviously what happened yesterday was that they all got hit, by Trump's tariff. So if you look at what Trump has been up to vis-a-vis China over the last 6 weeks, there's definitely been a steady escalation in terms of whatever, putting pressure on China, and things have gotten more hot. To me, there are only two plausible explanations for why. The first one is, again, it's about Israel. Because Trump needs the Chinese. Trump would like the Chinese to say, you know what? We're no longer going to be importing any oil from Iran. I have no doubt that's what Trump asked the Chinese, to stop basically Iranian oil imports. And because if they did that, the Iranian economy is going to collapse the next day, right? The Chinese said, over our dead body. Or rather, the Chinese politely declined. And that pissed Trump off. And maybe that's what this escalation is about. But there's a second possibility, which is that the China hawks within the administration, they are basically saying, you know what, we joined this administration in order to, basically take a tougher line on China. You take it or leave it. Okay. Especially Trump is being accused being whatever, being soft on Russia, whatever it is. People, I suspect that he's under enormous pressure to basically increase pressure on China. So right now, what I'm saying is that this is why also the world is in a very dangerous place right now. This is what people need to understand, which is that with Europe, Trump has crossed the Rubicon. Okay. The Europeans, to the extent the outcome of the German election has brought in a more, someone who's willing to be independent of the US and take a much tougher line on Russia, I would say Europe has also crossed the Rubicon right now. So I would say that in Europe, the tension is going to escalate from here. I strongly think it gives that backdrop, especially given the pressure from within in the US, I think we could potentially see a deterioration of US-China relations. I mean, things go back to where they were under Biden, which was like a really bad situation between US and China. And all this, ironically, I would be much happier. You might say, wow, what does this all mean? I would be much happier once Israel's taking care of Iran. Because then a lot of this tension is going to fall away. Okay. But that has to happen first. And let's just hope, it's going to happen sooner rather than later.
I do agree. So it's interesting that Trump has this maybe a Nixon agenda or maybe a Reagan agenda. They were very tough against communism, but they were a lot softer when it had to do with actual dealing with the communist countries. Nixon had China. He got relations with China. And Reagan went to visit in Moscow, and they came to. I mean, there's a way of being tough and then diffusing the tension, which is a better way maybe of winning these kinds of Cold Wars. So it's interesting to see if this will work out. I'd like to go through a few more topics. We talked about the United States economy. What's your view about Elon Musk's operation in Dodge? How is that going? And what's your prediction? Is this going to work? Will he be able to save the United States economy?
I think, I mean, obviously you never want to bet against Elon Musk because the guy had just been, I think he's we all wish that he's Jewish, but he's not. He's not even Jewish, even though a lot of people thought at the time, I mean, when I first heard about his name, I was like, well, maybe he's a Jewish guy.
Maybe Israeli even, yeah.
Israeli, whatever it is. It's too bad for Israel. But we have Bibi. That's good enough. Okay, for now. I just hope at least Bibi's health will hold up. And the left will stop basically lynching him. But the point here is that, Elon Musk, I think, I think personally, he doesn't understand what he's taken on. I mean, in the sense that, and again, this guy, very smart engineer. And I think, buying, Twitter was like a very, very good decision for him, both in terms of, I have no doubt he's already making money if he wants to sell Twitter tomorrow he'll probably double his money. But most importantly, I think it's giving him huge political influence. But if you think about like what he's taking on in terms of like his target in terms of spending cuts, right? I mean, because he's, 3 months ago, he promised to cut, annual federal spending by $2 trillion, right? And then it went down to $1 trillion. And you say, well, okay, fine. So like, I thought $2 trillion was impossible. So $1 trillion may be more manageable. But in my humble opinion, he'll be lucky if he cut $300 billion, okay? Because every day you hear about people being laid off, from the federal government. But the reality is that all the federal government employs only 2.3 million people, okay? I mean, total salaries of federal employees is like $300 billion. Like how much can you cut from that?
Right.
Like, you can't cut $1 trillion from $300 billion of total salaries. I mean, you'll be lucky. He can cut the so-called probationary workers. These are basically people who've only been working for the federal government for less than 1 year, so they don't have any job protection, benefits, so on and so forth. So you'll be able to fire them without any consequences in terms of you don't have to pay them benefits, you don't have to offer this and this and that. And that will save you like let's put it this way. If he fires 10% of the workforce and some more, and then he gets rid of USAID, he goes after the the diversity, the DEI thing, in the Department of Education, he'll be very lucky if he gets $100 billion there, okay? And then the second thing he wants to go after, which is a much bigger pie, is of course fraud, right? I mean, the Government Accountability Office, which is a bipartisan congressional agency that is, that's viewed as a congressional watchdog, last year published a report in which they estimate that the federal government every year spends about $450 billion a year, involving fraud. And what they mean by fraud in this case is benefit abuse for the most part. That is, dead people claiming Social Security insurance, or people who are earning, more income than minimum wages, who are claiming Medicaid and so on and so forth, okay? They're talking about $450 billion. Now, if Elon Musk can go after that and be successful, then obviously that will, that's $450 billion. That's not too basically. That will go a long way to meeting his $1 trillion budget. But I somehow don't think it's going to be that easy. I mean, obviously last week, Elon Musk was talking about, like, they identify all these 2 million people who are over the age of 100, whatever it is, like, who are receiving Social Security. I'd be very surprised the US government is that incompetent. I mean, it's possible it just basically for the entry of that person, they haven't got the death certificate, therefore they never filled out this guy's dead. But it doesn't mean that they're still paying out Social Security. Okay, check to the guy. But be that as may. And also, it is very possible that a lot of these frauds are small, little frauds. One thing is like one big systemic fraud, if you can catch it easily and you're going to save a lot of money. If you have a lot of little tiny frauds, it will be very expensive to track everybody down and try to get
right for like $4,000 here and there or something. Yeah,
exactly. That's you're going to end up basically costing you more money to try to track it down. I mean, imagine like we can solve every crime if everybody works for the police, right? It's the same kind of thing. I mean, so from that point of view, like you want to basically get more money back than what you're going to spend to get the money back, right? And so I think that's consideration. So I think like he'll be lucky to get another $100 billion out of that. So that's $200 billion a year. And then we get to the most important one, which is the most dangerous one, which is going after defense spending. Like if you look at the US total discretionary spending meaning like non-mandatory. Mandatory spending is like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and so on and so forth. That stuff like only Congress can decide to cut, right? So Elon Musk can only go after the so-called discretionary spending, okay? Even there is arguable, like, how much power the president actually has. But half of discretionary spending right now in the US is defense. I mean, defense spending has been like the fastest growing, in the US. And let's be honest here. I mean, again, this is the difference between Israel and the US. The US, the military-industrial complex, is like the most powerful deep state in the US. They have so much money, they have incredible amount of power, and these people are professional killers. Okay. I've been saying this, for the last, 3 months. In fact, last year, at the start of last year, in beginning of 2024, you can basically Google me. I actually predicted that Trump was going to get assassinated. I said Trump, if he survived the assassination, he was going to go on the win. But I actually said he was going to be assassinated. Now, we will never find out who actually pulled the trigger and so on and so forth. But let me tell you this. There is nobody okay, that hates Trump more right now than the military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex views the Ukraine war as one giant gravy train. Okay? They are in favor of fighting this forever war. By the way, this is why they're all Zionists, pro-Israel, by the way, because, war is good business for them. Okay? And this is why they also ally with the Jewish neoconservatives, okay? Who are, guess what? Pro-Ukraine and pro-Israel. Why do you think even someone like Douglas Murray is pro-Ukraine and pro-Israel? It's the same thing, okay? It's the same thing. These people, basically. Now, let me tell you this. It was actually very interesting. So Elon Musk did an interview, okay, with Joe Rogan early in the week. Mm-hmm. I think it was yesterday, or the day before yesterday. And he said he's going after defense spending. But he said something to the effect that if he goes any harder, he will be assassinated. What I just basically told you. Okay. Sure.
So you're saying this will be a big challenge. Even if he's not assassinated, there will be tremendous opposition to cutting defense spending.
It's just like nobody will, in Israel, nobody's going to screw around with the IDF. But the IDF is not even nearly as powerful as the military-industrial.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Right. These people, again, this is why America, a part of America is very much hated. And this is why, you know what Trump said, right? He said 2 weeks ago, he said he wants to do a deal with China and Russia that will basically reduce, the number of nuclear warheads. And the end goal is that he wants to reduce spending by 50%. You think these people are applauding him? Or they're saying, we have to get him, we have to stop him before it's too late?
Right.
Okay. And this is why, I think this is, when we think about U.S. foreign policy under Trump and U.S. policy, period, okay, fiscal policy, foreign policy, so on and so forth, that is a very important constraint that Trump faces, okay? That even someone like Elon Musk is too afraid to go too far because his own life could be at stake. That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Okay, so our time is almost up. It's been very interesting, very long conversation. I'd like to talk a little bit more about Israel economy. What's your view on our economy? It's a free economy, obviously. Israel has done some, it's gone forward in the past 20 years or so, but we're still behind. And how is Israel viewed in the economic world, and what can we do to make it better?
I think listen, in a way, I think, Israel's biggest problem, of course, is the low level productivity. Labor productivity in Israel is very low. Especially if you look outside the tech sector, it's very low. And it's right. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. I think within OECD, Israel is definitely in the bottom 20% when it comes to labor productivity. And there are a lot of reasons for this, but we're not going to go into it. But I think the service sector, there's no doubt that, let's put it this way, Israelis are not the most organized people. Right? They're not the most organized people, and they don't like working for other people. Right? Every Israeli, whether they're educated or not educated, they all want to work for themselves. So as a result, you have too many companies. If I walk down, basically, let's say, Hamat HaShalom, basically a big shopping street, there are so many little shops. I'm even wondering, what do they sell? Can they even really make a living? They said it has probably to do with these Polish Jews, Moroccan Jews, they come to Israel, whatever, they're middle class, wherever they came from, they were shopkeepers. Right. Now, they think that working as a shopkeeper is better than cleaning houses, even though actually cleaning houses, my Nigerian house cleaner probably makes more money than some of these shopkeepers, in Israel. But they think that is socially respectable thing to do, to be a shopkeeper. Right. But there is no doubt there is an enormous amount of disorganization at that level. And then, of course, there is the bureaucracy and regulation. I mean, Europeans hate Israel, and yet Israel go and adopt all these European practices when it comes to regulations and so forth. So that, it's impossible to open a restaurant, basically in Israel. It's impossible to open a business in Israel because, the bureaucracy is going to kill you. I mean, I know so many businesses that have gone, great businesses, that went out of business because they can't survive with the red tape, the bureaucracy, the regulations, and so forth. Now, of course, am I surprised? Yeah, if the prime minister, instead of being able to do his job, is being hauled into basically some fake witch trial, okay, trying to basically put him away, the left doesn't really care. I mean, they think that they're willing to destroy Israel if that's what it takes in order to basically get rid of Bibi. I'm sure the left would rather that the Egyptians take Bibi as opposed to taking the Gazans, okay?
Sure.
Right. So this is the problem. The problem is that the political dysfunction is filtering down through the entire economy. So the whole government is cannot get anything done, right? So I think from that point of view, that's what coming. Now, of course, the tech sector is doing well. But honestly, thanks to the Russian Jews, there is no doubt, that Israel, but even there, by the way, it's not clear to me that unless Israel is willing to, Israel may soon have to reinvent itself, by the way, because the whole tech space is going through a massive transformation. Sure, Israel is still pretty good when it comes to cyber security and so on and so forth. But even there, it's becoming more competitive because the world of AI, that is a paradigm shift. Will Israel have basically the resources to be able to compete at a bigger scale? I don't know. Maybe. I assume yes, because all these big companies, it's not, these days it's not so much Israeli companies that are whatever, but all these foreign companies been coming to Israel, set up shop here and hire Israeli and so on and so forth. So I still think that, when it comes to employment, the fact that so many Israelis finish degrees in computer science, that is the biggest plus for Israel. The fact that, US wants to keep China backward, that means that, they're more willing to come to Israel, okay, as opposed to whatever. But I do think that, that's the only thing, okay? And then Israel needs to find other things that it's good at. And other than just technology, so that everybody in Israel, even those who are not working in technology, actually can get ahead and compete and do well. And I think for that, we really need to have some political stability in this country.
Right. So we can conclude on a prayer for political stability in Israel, which will be wonderful. Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting conversation to talk about all these global issues. Makes me feel more important, but really to understand the world better. I think that's very important. It's a very important message you have for the Israeli audience as well. So thank you very much for being here, for spending the time. And
not at all. I just want to say, everything I said today is partly because I think, once Israelis are able to look at Israel through the lenses of the world, then I think it's easier for Israelis to make sense of what Bibi is doing or not doing. Okay? Right. Because Israelis look at everything through the lenses of Israel. So, Bibi's not doing this, or he's doing this, whatever it is. But if you look at because at the end of the day, this is where playing the game right is very important. And playing the game right, in the world of politics today, there are chess players and there are checker players. And Bibi is one of the few chess players. And I think from that point of view, his long-term goal for the interest of Israel is to advance Israel strategically, even if it means some setback, tactical setback. Right. And I think it's unfortunate that, the mainstream media in Israel, obviously this is why I'm a big supporter of Mita and your show and so on and so forth. We need to basically, the problem with mainstream media is that it focuses too much on basically the feelings of the government through the lenses of every day, without really thinking about the sort of longer term strategic picture. And I think, the only way you can formulate that strategic view is looking at the world holistically with Israel as being part of it.
Right. Yeah, so thank you very much for this view, and it's been a pleasure. I hope I can have you over again in the somehow in the not so distant future, and we can see what happens. Since
absolutely, my pleasure. Absolutely,
it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
פרק נוסף של הפודקאסט שלי הגיע לסיומו, אני מודה לכם על ההאזנות ועל השיתופים. השיחה הזאת הייתה עבורי מאוד מאוד מעניינת, מאוד מאוד מלמדת. דיוויד פורס לנו תמונת מבט רחבה של השחקנים הגדולים, של האינטרסים הגדולים, של המגמות הרוחביות בעולם, וזה מאוד מאוד מעניין להבין את הדברים מתוך נקודת המבט הזאת, ולא רק מתוך הפריזמה הישראלית הצרה. אני מזכיר לכם שאנחנו עובדים לפי עיקרון 5 המ"מים, מנוי, מגיב, משתף, ממליץ, מחבב. תעשו את הדברים האלה, תתמכו בפודקאסט שלי, שכמה שיותר אנשים יחשפו לתכנים האלה ויוכלו גם ללמוד מהדברים החכמים ששמענו היום. אז תודה רבה לכם, ואנחנו נתראה פה שוב בשבוע הבא.